welcome to another edition of the China Talking Points podcast, both in audio and in video this week. I'm Eric Olander, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, co-founder, and co-editor of China Talking Points, Michael McCune, who's in Shanghai this week. And this week, we're going to talk a little bit about what appears to be the societal strains that are showing up after 30 years of reform. Of course, we're talking about the school killings that have dominated the headlines in China for the past few weeks. Then just this week, there was news of a swinger, if you will, who was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison for what was the original charge? I think it was kind of
I think it's sort of public licentiousness.
Licentiousness.
Or something
That
like
was the word I've never actually used that word. So it was licentiousness. And there's just been a number of these different issues that have come up just in this past week. And one has to think is, if you connect the dots, is it something that has a context, or are they just isolated incidents to what's going on? Michael, what's the perspective from what you're picking up in China this week?
Well, it's a bit muted on the ground here, I think, as always. China's going about trying to make money every day. And I don't mean the government, I mean all the population. Economic concerns usually always trump any kind of additional time for commentary. But it gave, I think, what has shown up a little bit in conversation is, I guess, some concern about, how much I have to be concerned with my own privacy and from the point of view of what is private. And I think that is sort of the name of the game here, because on the one hand, we have stepped up security, stepping around for school security for elementary schools in particular. And again, that's just sort of the ability of China to show force and to be there to help out society, but also really kind of penetrate deeply if need be. And on the same side, they have the question with the swinger case of what about my own rights inside my own room, what I talk with just my friends? Where are the lines? So I think that conversation is, while it's not prevalent in every aspect of who you meet and talk to in Shanghai, I think it certainly is on the mind of the people here.
Well, it brings up a tangential issue to that, is this idea of China's morality crisis. And what I mean by that is it goes back to an article in Finance Asia from 2004, which talked about the destruction of moral values in China. And let me just briefly explain what that is, which is the communists came to power kind of defeating feudalism and Confucianism, and said the value structure you need is communism, and they defined what morals were. Well, through the reforms, communism has been discredited, and then capitalism came in its way. Now we've moved from capitalism, if you will, to materialism and consumerism. The question is that money seems to be a very important moral guidepost for people. And then the economic pressures now that are associated with money. So the killings that happened, these weren't done by necessarily poor peasants who had no options. One was a physician who just couldn't make it in the modern China. And so I wonder if we're coming up into this morality crisis that's coming up, and there's a moral vacuum.
Well, you missed out on one potential moral construct, which is Confucianism. And I think, call it Neo-Confucian or whatnot, I think Chinese society has a pretty good sense of how it wants to be when you talk about friends, family, work, etc. What it's having a problem with is maybe living up to the ideals of what it wants to be. There are cracks and stresses showing in modern society because as wealth has become generated, there are haves and have-nots to a greater degree of disparity than we've seen before, and there maybe aren't mechanisms to deal with how have-nots might act out, or how people with a lot of power and money might abuse. We're more used to the corruption and abuse of power side of the equation in China. Now I think we're coming up on the flip side of the people without power and money and how they might act out based for whatever reason.
I mean, let's use the United States as an example. After the Columbine shooting, a lot of people had hope that would then prompt certain gun reforms, particularly in schools and whatnot. It did not. So even in our society, and what's been interesting about the coverage in the United States of the shootings is it's filled with an enormous amount of sympathy. Oftentimes when things go wrong in China, a lot of people in the United States will point to it as a failing of a political system or a failing of communism or whatever, in that kind of hostile tone. What's been so interesting is the extended coverage that's happened, and it's been rather sympathetic, and the comparisons drawn to the United States, which on the surface seems a far more violent society, particularly because we have access to guns in ways that the Chinese don't. But also, school violence is something that's not uncommon in the United States. We've had metal detectors long before the Chinese.
Well, let's also be clear. It's much easier to be a loner in the U.S. than it is in China, right? Just population density, family, government, social organizations. I mean, there are a lot of people, I think, watching. I think we don't see it as happening to the pervasive level it happens in the U.S. We just start to see it happen now, and it gives me some reflection about looking back to the time in China when we first got here, Eric. I really think back to the changes I've seen, and they kind of go hand in hand. I remember the first expressions of public affection that I started seeing with hand-holding and romance in the parks or whatnot. These type of things, which we would just find to be benign and enjoyable to know of, but they happened and they've blossomed. But, there is a darker side of change in society, of people being left behind or people that don't know how to adjust or fit in. And I think that there aren't, that's where we see these issues now starting to surface, and I think China, obviously wants to face up to trying to deal with it, but it's I think going to be a tough maturation process over the next couple of years.
So, do you think that the sequence of events that have happened over the past 6 months, including the issues related to privacy, even potentially the Google face-off with the government, on top of what we've just seen with the school killings, all of these changes that are happening, whether it's on privacy or on sexual mores or on violence, will lead to some kind of societal change, maybe not from the government, but maybe from the people?
I don't think it's going to be changed from the people, except in terms of, a debate about some of these non-political aspects. I mean, I could say personal privacy right is certainly a political topic, but it's not changing the government. And so in that respect, I think we will see people pushing limits. It will be, I think people will follow the Swinger case with great curiosity in China, because he did not admit guilt, and he will appeal. I can't believe that he would win at the end of the day, but I think he'll at least go down as sort of setting a precedent that it's a difficult path for somebody to try and enforce in China some of these laws. But I think what we will see, frankly, is a government response as they try to, because I think the government sees its responsibility, and also it's packed with the people of why it stays in power with addressing these issues and coming up with solutions. I just wonder how sensitive the solutions might be versus blunt instruments that the Communist Party can still come up with.
Okay, well, before we go, give us 3 talking points to contextualize what we've been talking about today, particularly as it relates to the series of events that have happened over the past 2 or 3 weeks.
Sure. I think let's talk about school children and mental illness. I think definitely you're going to see a lot more come to the fore about mental illness in China. I think that whole practice and academic pursuit of psychology and psychiatry in China is something that is going to become sort of more open and public. That will be one of the benefits of the sad cases that have happened. Second, I think we're going to see a sensitivity occur about the pursuit of pleasure in China. I think people really kind of thought they could do anything they wanted in their own personal space up until this case, and I think it's going to cause some reflection, not about what's right or wrong morally, but I just think in terms of both the government systems as well as individuals, I think are going to go through a period of reflection. I think at the end of the day, individual pursuit of pleasure and happiness and private acts it will hold sway in China. Finally, I think that we are going to see this issue related to, we didn't talk about too much today, but we know juvenile justice and juvenile crime is on the rise in China. And I think this is a big focus of the government these days as they try to establish and broaden the rudimentary juvenile justice system they have in order to stave off sort of wayward youths, which that could be a flashpoint for trouble.
Okay, well, that'll do it for this week's China Talking Points. Michael, thank you very much from Shanghai. Next week, I think you're back in the U.S., and then we will have another podcast. And, of course, we have a whole series of new articles at www.chinatalkingpoints.com. We're also on the verge of launching our new Chinese language website, 中国世纪观点.com. So if you want to see that, you can just spell it out in pinyin, and we'll be putting up Chinese language podcasts and videos, and basically everything that we're doing on the English side we'll also be doing on the Chinese side. So we'll talk to you next week. Have a great week.